Oh, Steve White, Trek Boy 89 for Steve Arts 89. Well, we just had the 6th episode of Strange New Worlds released, and the sort of universal sort of consensus is that it seemed to resemble a Star Trek episode, and people seemed to enjoy it. And people were a little mixed about this sort of dividing of the crew, where they had all the original series characters on the Farragut with Kirk, and the sort of new characters, well, I guess Mbenga's reused, from the Strange New Worlds sort of Pike crew on the other one. Now, I felt kind of bad for Pike because he never really had the series. Like, Kirk came in way too early and undermined him. People just were focusing on Kirk. What's Kirk's role going to be? How Kirk's going to be involved? Why is he there? And so forth. And Pike, we never really got to see his crew, the crew that was in the cage that we always wanted to see, Yeoman Colt and Dr. Boyce, and I've forgotten the name of the other guy. And people like Gary, I guess Gary Mitchell would have come in the first year, so we haven't gotten to him yet. But I never feel like we got the Pike show. I mean, we got number 1, and that was really it. She was the only character that sort of came back from so the people who watched the cage, wanted to see what a show on that ship with that crew would have been like. We never quite got that, and now it's just slowly morphing into the original Star Trek, and they're sort of making this pitch, and this seemed like a bit of a backdoor pilot to, well, this is what you could get. We could give you basically a remake of Star Trek with our actors and our sets and everything, and some people were saying they liked being back on, felt like back on the Enterprise with Kirk and Spock and all that together, and they could see how the relationships will develop, and that was sort of interesting. But other people sort of don't want it remade at all, and some people just don't want it remade by these people, and they want it to be different. Like, they want a bridge that doesn't look like something from Tron. They want a ship that looks like the original Enterprise, and the universe to look like, well, to be in the original universe, not this alternative universe, which they still are trying to insist is the original canon universe, and calling them both Prime. They've never managed to fool real Star Trek fans, but general fans don't really get the difference, so it's a bit of a mess. But I just was watching that, and I was just thinking, it's interesting, but I never really feel like Pike had a crew, and what he was left with wasn't really a crew. It just looks like, I don't feel like we ever really got the Pike show, and I'd love someone to do a Captain Pike show where it's Pike and the people from the cage on a grey ship. Like, the thing I noticed that I hadn't really thought about but is really wrong is all the orange on the ship that wasn't there in the cage. That was something that was in there in Kirk's era, and they could have used that as like a colour coding, like, oh, now this is what the Enterprise looks like. They've sort of given the ship a superficial change to show that it's now the 5-year mission in Kirk's era. And all the modern Treks were going for this monochrome dark sort of look, but yet when they went to the Enterprise, they made it sort of, well, lighting like Tron and black floors and orange, and it just never worked. So it would have been nice to have seen that beautiful monochrome version of that bridge set without the lights. And that's the other thing I had to comment on. I wish I'd mentioned in the video I did about bridges. The lights shining right at the camera again. When J.J. Abrams did that in his film with the lens flares, it did give a sense of urgency and movement, and sort of helped speed along the action. But a lot of these scenes, it's just people talking. It's just regular scenes, but you have lights just shining directly at the camera, and as people's faces are disappearing behind a burst of light next to their head, and then their faces in shadow. It's just like, just stop it. It kind of worked with action, but just regular. I mean, and it makes no sense. You would not be able to survive all day on a bridge set, on a real bridge of the ship, staring into lights in your eyes. They burn out your corneas and make you blind. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So that's another little thing I sort of had to comment on, because I was really aware of it in that episode, more than normal, because of the lighting. But it's still there. It's just not as obvious. But yeah, basically, as much as it was interesting to see the crews sort of, the two, now we sort of feel like a two crews in a way, split up. I feel like we still never really got the real Pike crew, Pike universe. And you look at what Otoy did with Yeoman Colt, and that would have been really amazing to have seen, a slightly modern, better, executed Pike era Enterprise. I just feel like it just made me feel like we never really got that. We're already sort of, edging out of that into just being, Kirk's Enterprise and everything. I feel like Pike never really got a real shot and never really had the show. So I had to comment on that and the lights. But I'm going to go. Feel free to share, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think of, Strange New Worlds. I feel like it had a little bit of an identity crisis from fairly early on. And now it's just sort of become like a pre-Star Trek show, like a pre-original series show, as opposed to its own sort of prequel show. It doesn't feel like a prequel in some ways. But, yeah, I'm going to go.